Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic and interesting side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and I'm very happy to be back with another episode after having a week off due to, if you've been listening, you'll know, due to catching COVID when I was on my holidays. So I was over in the UK having a 2-week break in London and in Margate, visiting a friend of the show, Kieran Daly, who sometimes appears as a guest. And on the very last day of my summer holidays, after lots of time spent walking on the beach and visiting museums, eating nice foods and just having a great time, I got a positive COVID test back. I'm not sure where I picked it up, but that was the end of that, really. I didn't travel. I decided to wait it out, and I had a very rough bout of COVID. I know it's rough for everyone, but for me it was 10 days. It was not like just a flu. It was like a very heavy bout of disorientation and vertigo and fever and all sorts of stuff that lasted a whole 10 days. But I'm very happy that it is now over with. I got a negative test on day 10 and managed to get back over here to Iceland. I took the journey in 2 parts and stayed overnight in an airport hotel just because I was so exhausted from the virus. But I'm back in Iceland, I'm back home, I'm back at my desk. It's nice and cool over here. It's like a cool 12 degrees in Iceland. It was 25 over in Margate, 22 to 25. British summer was in full effect. And so I'm really happy to be home. I really, really am. It's been a rough couple of weeks, man. What can I say? But I did a lot of gaming in that time when I could get the concentration for it, because during the COVID, concentration was low. I couldn't really focus. I tried to play a bunch of games and bounced on most of them. But I did find a couple that helped me get through that time. And one of them was actually a game that I've talked about before, and I've played before on the Xbox when it was on Game Pass. But it's now left Game Pass, and so I picked it up on Switch because I really loved the game. It was originally recommended to me by Hopple, a friend of the show and patron of the show, and that game is The Wild at Heart. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that game today as the featured game of the episode. But I did try out a few others. Whilst I was in the UK with COVID, stuck in Kieran's house, just sweating it out in that summer heat with the sound of seagulls. Margate is by the sea and it was lots of blue sky. It was kind of frustrating to be so close to a beautiful white sand beach with white chalk cliffs, not to be able to enjoy it. I was really just confined to the house. I tried to take a few seaside walks, but honestly, the coughing just got the better of me, even just going up and down the stairs or moving from room to room. So I was really stuck in the house, and one of the ways that I comforted myself was to just order myself some treats. As you might know, Iceland doesn't really do Amazon. You have to pay a lot of tax and everything. It's barely worth it. And so being in the UK, I thought maybe I'm just going to go through my wish list and treat myself to some stuff. So I bought Xenoblade Chronicles, the definitive edition for Switch. It's a game that I've wanted to play for ages. I've just been so curious about it. Nintendo fans sing its praises. And I played a little bit of Xenoblade Chronicles. I played probably 5 or 6 hours of it. I was doing like an hour a day whilst my concentration lasted. And I started off quite liking it. It was more retro than I imagined. It felt like somewhere between something like Ocarina of Time and something like Nier Replicant, like the remastered Nier game that I played recently. It's somewhere between those two, so it felt pretty retro, this definitive edition. And it's a very pure JRPG, I would say. There are lots of systems to learn. It has a kind of a strange plot. that can be a little hard to follow, the way that JRPGs, especially of that era, tend to have. And it's really cool. It's like it's set on like a pair of huge titans that froze in battle eons ago, and have grown over with moss and plant life and people just live on them. Like they live on like the kneecap, on the ankle, on the thigh, and they live on these giant titans that have just frozen. It's a very cool premise, and you'll find yourself going from place to place on these titans. And I found that to be pretty wildly imaginative, like pretty interesting. But the game became a grind pretty quickly, I would say. Like I felt like I was grinding levels in order to be able to pass combat encounters. I felt like there were many combat encounters that I didn't really want. The combat is like a mixture of party-based and real-time combat. I guess a little bit like Ni no Kuni, if you've played that one. And I didn't find the combat that fun, and so I started skipping it a lot. But if you skip the combat, you miss out on leveling up, and that makes the game progression really hard. And so I fell into that old JRPG trap of wanting to skip combat but needing to do combat. And that's an issue for me. Like being forced to do boring combat in order to progress the story. It's not a game formula that I particularly love. And so after playing a bit of Xenoblade and enjoying it, but also just finding it a bit of a grind, I put it away, and I thought maybe I'm just not in a JRPG kind of mood, or maybe even I'm just not a JRPG kind of guy. But I mean, I am glad that I tried it, and I may well come back to it in the future if the mood for that kind of game grabs me. But I did try out a bit of Xenoblade Chronicles. And actually, before the COVID kicked in, whilst I was staying with Kieran, we did actually try to play It Takes Two. And me and Kieran have had a plan to play this together ever since it was Game of the Year. I have actually tried to play a little bit with a friend of mine called Nick also. Nick is like, I would say, a pretty casual, fairly beginner gamer, but with a lot of enthusiasm. And Kieran is actually like a expert speed gamer at this point, I would say. He really just rattles through games at an incredible pace. And I'm somewhere between. And so I found when I was playing with Nick, I found that I was kind of streaking ahead and seeing the solutions to puzzles before Nick would, and then he would kind of have to catch up. And it was fine and fun, but there was a bit of a mismatch in how we were playing. And then when I played it with Kieran, it was like a mismatch in the opposite direction. Like Kieran was just rocketing ahead whilst I was just looking at stuff and seeing if I could smash glass and, jumping up on things to see if anything would happen. And he was already like 10 platforms ahead of me. And so I've tried to play It Takes Two twice now with two different friends, and I've bounced both times. It is definitely fun, and I can see the fun of it, but I have not yet found like the guy to play it with or the person to play it with. And I'm not like so in love with it that I'm dying to find that person. There are a couple of things about it that bug me. The story bugs me a little bit because it's about two parents in the throes of kind of a fading marriage, and they bicker constantly. They just bicker, they blame each other, they jab their fingers at each other all the time. They're constantly rowing and arguing and sniping and getting angry. And honestly, it stresses me out. Like, it's just like being stuck in an argument and wanting to leave. And that's not a great vibe for a game. So I'm not actually sure if It Takes Two is the game for me either. But it was interesting to try it out with Kieran. It was interesting to try it out with Nick. Maybe at some point in the future, the time will be right. But for me, I mean, after all of the Game of the Year hype that It Takes Two got, I have to say that, I mean, I think that my Games of the Year list, like Solar Ash, Chicory, Sable, Inscription, and Signs of the Sojourner, my top 5, like It Takes Two wouldn't even come close to my top 10, to be honest. So it's definitely not a Game of the Year for me. Whenever there's a Game of the Year that you didn't play yourself, I feel like I have to try it. I just want to know what all of the hype is about. I want to see if it's as good as people say. And for me, that's been a win some, lose some sort of situation, Like I tried Resident Evil Village with very little expectation and absolutely loved it. It ended up in my top 10 of the year. It was just really, really fun. House of Horror. ridiculous, wild, fun horror game. And then at the same time, there's the occasional one like It Takes Two, or like Returnal or Final Fantasy Remake, these highly acclaimed games of the year that I play and just do not get into, really. So it's very strange to play a game that was roundly awarded Games of the Year left, right, and center, and to just think, this is like a fun little co-op game, and it is inventive. I see what people liked about it, but I don't know, man. I think, perhaps the mainstream taste is not my taste all of the time. There is the occasional mainstream game that slips through, like Resident Evil. But for the most part, it's the indie games that I really love. And that's fine, I guess a lot of you that are listening probably have something similar in your taste as well. We all like some big games, but I think probably the listeners of this show love a good indie game. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And The Wild at Heart is a game that really fits into that. It really fits into a love of indie games, of smaller games, and I am looking forward to talking about it today. But before I do, let me just briefly mention that this show is patron-supported. We actually got a new patron, so I'd like to say a big thank you to Adam Moran, who became a patron of the show at the $1 tier. Thanks very much to Adam for joining. I will also say that this episode's featured game came from a patron. It was a patron recommendation from Hopple. So we have a Discord that you can join if you become a patron of the show. You can suggest games, you can join us and talk about what you're playing. Everyone's very hyped in the channel at the moment for Stray. We have a special channel going for Chorus. We have a special channel going for Road 96, which just came to Game Pass and everyone's playing it. So we have a couple of Games of the Moment channel. We have hype channels where people just get excited. We have a Wordle channel where people post their Wordles, the few of us that are still playing Wordle. So if you enjoy this podcast and would like to show your support, recommend games to me, and join the community, you can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild for $1 a month. I'll put a link in the description. And thanks very much to all of my existing patrons, and thanks to you if that's something that you'd like to do. And thanks to Adam. Thanks for being my newest patron of Gaming in the Wild. And with that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, The Wild at Heart. So The Wild at Heart is a game that came out in 2021. It is developed by Moonlight Kids. I believe it's their first game, and it was published by Humble Bundle. It came out as a day one game on Xbox Game Pass, but left after a year, and so it is now gone. But it did come out on Switch and PlayStation this year. I was lucky enough to get a code, so thank you to the publicist for sending me that to play it on Switch. I was halfway through this game on Game Pass and having a great time, but something just came out and derailed me during my playthrough, and when I came back to it, it was gone from Game Pass. It's just an occupational hazard, and it's a game that I felt would be a great fit for Switch. It has a lot of Nintendo references, and it's just that kind of perfect Switch game, a top-down game that looks nice, with a nice visual style to it. It's very chill. It's not the kind of game that you need a big screen for, even though the artwork is beautiful. A little bit like Chicory, and a little bit like Hyper Light Drifter. Just the kind of game that just fits on Switch like a glove. It belongs there somehow. The game did okay critically. It has 75 on Metacritic. I think I'd probably go to 8 out of 10 on this one. The audience agreed. It gets between a 7 and an 8 out of 10, so it's generally positive. How Long to Beat has the game at 11 hours for the story, 15 hours for extras, and 19 hours for completionists. My playthrough on Switch was about 12 hours, but I had played half of the game before it left on Game Pass, so I've probably done 18 or so all told. And I have to say that playing it on Switch, I noticed some immediate improvements that addressed some of the problems that I had experienced on the Xbox version. And when I looked at the patch notes, I saw that this game has been worked on since I last played it. They have added some features that really made it a lot better. For example, it's quite easy to lose your little spritelings, your little Pikmin friends, and to have them scattered around the map. And they've added a recall waystone, which means that you can just call all of them back to you from all around the map at any given moment. There was one puzzle that I just got so frustrated about, where you're supposed to find something, and there's no way for you to know, but it's somewhere that you've already been, and you just have to go back there. And it was really bad. I had to look it up in a guide, and it made me mad. And they've put a signpost there in this new patched version saying, come back here later when you need to, just to give you that little hint that you need to jog your memory that that's where you have to go to solve the puzzle. They've also changed a whole bunch of small quality of life things. And so this version that is on Switch is actually, or I think the patch is on all versions, but it came out around the time of the Switch game. It's the best version of this game by far. If you have played it in the past, there have been several patches to the game, not just bugs, but really significant gameplay changes that really improve it. So shout out to Moonlight Kids for listening to criticism of the game, and for adding new features that address some of the common complaints that people had. It made this second playthrough much better for me, and much nicer, so thanks to Moonlight Kids for that. And the developers described this game thus: wield an ever-growing herd of quirky creatures to rebuild broken paths, battle perilous beasts, and solve peculiar puzzles in a rich, interconnected world. Join two young runaways as they unravel the mysteries of a lost realm in this nostalgic storybook fantasy. And that's a really nice description of the game. I have described it as a gentle, atmospheric, and aesthetically pleasing action-adventure fairy tale that's a love letter to some Nintendo classics. And anyone that loves Nintendo games will find something to like in this game, I think. It does mix together elements of 2D Zelda, like the old Zelda games. Link to the Past is definitely in the DNA of this game. There's a lot of Pikmin in this game. You get your little spritelings that follow you around and that you use to solve puzzles. And there's a dash of Luigi's Mansion as well, and that you have a vacuum that you can use to collect things, to suck things out of the background, to open the way forward. So it has three classic Zelda games at its heart, but I would say that amazingly, The Wild at Heart does manage to wear these influences on its sleeve at the same time as very much being its own game. I wouldn't say that it's a clone. I wouldn't say that it's a copy. I think that it's a game that is heavily influenced by Nintendo, but partially through the visual style, the music, and just the overall feel. It does manage to have its own personality in a way that is really, really cool. I really enjoyed this one. So the game begins when you run away from home. You play a young runaway called Wake, who seems to be, I don't know, I would guess about 13 or something like that. And Wake has a difficult home life, and the game begins when Wake wakes up in their bedroom and decides that today is the day they're going to leave, and they put together some provisions, they put together their backpack, they leave through the back garden, they leave a note for their dad, who they don't get on with, and they run away into the forest. And in the forest, they get lost. They're trying to meet a friend called Kirby, but they get very, very lost. And before they know it, they're lost and upset in the woods when a little elf appears, a little wooden spriteling. It looks a little bit like a Pikmin. It's got a little pointy head, and it's made out of natural materials. And it comes to Wake, and it leads Wake into a tree with a giant door that leads to a magical realm that is in need of help. And that's where the game really begins. It turns out that this realm is a sealed away, natural, magical place. It's a little bit like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. You step through the back of the wardrobe. In this case, you step into the tree trunk, and then you are there. And it's a home to the Green Shields. And this is a group of mythical beings who live in a village called the Grove. And they're an oddball bunch of guardians, and they look after the forest, and they hold back a nasty nocturnal force called the Never. And it has a super strong fairy tale feel to it, I think partially because of the visual style, which is just so beautiful. Everything is hand-drawn, everything is hand-painted. It looks almost like paper art. It's just absolutely gorgeous, like a children's storybook of your dreams just springing to life. When you run past bushes, they shake, there are leaves falling, there's running water, there are particles in the air. When you brush past things, they move. There's also a lot of human trash there. There's a lot of like arcade machines just embedded into the floor with flickering screens. There are piles of rubbish that you can vacuum up, and so it's definitely, this fantasy world has been suffering. This hidden world has been suffering, and you're not quite sure how. But there is this force called the Never, and it is making the Green Shields forget everything. They're forgetting their own names. They're forgetting their guard duties. They're forgetting what the Never is. For example, they have a giant tome. It's like their encyclopedia, and they just call it book. They've forgotten the name of the book. They've forgotten how to read the book, and so they gift it to Wake. They've also forgotten their task, and so they need help. And so Wake pretty much gets drafted straight away to help them to repair the damage that the Never is doing to this forest realm, and to help seal the Never away before it breaks out and spreads into the human world. So it's got a very nice fairy tale setup, and the structure of the game is pretty much that you're going to be running around collecting things. For example, at the start of the game, the leader of the Green Shield says, the other Green Shields are all spread around this world. I sent them out on missions. None of them have come back. Could you go and find them? They're probably just lost. They've probably forgotten what they are doing. And so you head out. You head out from the grove, which is empty. It's like an empty village because everyone is just lost. And you have to wander around the map. You get little pins in the map, and you have to go and find the missing Green Shields and bring them all back to the grove so you can reassemble the crew and get on with this mission of defeating the Never. It's that part of the game where you're set loose in an open world and you just get to go and run around and have fun and discover things, and it happens pretty quickly, and it's really, really fun in this case. And the map of the World at Heart is really pleasant. There is a central woodland area. That's where the grove is. The grove acts as the hub of the game. And to the east, there is a swamp. To the north, there is a cold area. To the west, there is a coastline. So there are these different biomes that you can travel to. They're all absolutely beautiful to look at. They're all really fun. And they all have Metroidvania elements, I would say. For example, over in the swamps in the east, you will find some crystals that you won't know what to do with. But then once you've been to another area of the map, you'll know how to break through those crystals. Sometimes there are barrels that you need to weigh down. You can't quite figure out how to do it at the start, but it will all become clear as the game progresses. So it has this progression system where you'll be seeing puzzles that you can't solve yet. And if you're into Metroidvania type games, you'll be into it. You just have to make a little mental list of what is where, put pins on your map to come back later. And if you have that completionist instinct, there is enough meat on the bones here for you to do routes of the map, to do rings of the map, and to open up areas that you couldn't find before, and to find the collectibles that lie behind those areas to power yourself up and that kind of thing. So it is quite a satisfying map. It's interconnected, quite large play areas, and then there's a little loading screen sometimes when you pass from biome to biome. It's another thing that was improved in the patch, actually, was loading times. I remember on the Xbox, when I first played it, the loading times were kind of immense, but they've really, really been cut down, actually. They're a couple of seconds now rather than 10 or 15, and that really helps to speed the game along. And as you're walking around, you'll also find environmental puzzles, as well as those obstacles to overcome. You'll find switch puzzles. You'll find fun little loops where you enter an area, and then you'll come back out where you began. So it's got that Zelda dungeon-y feel. They're not dungeons, but they are little map areas full of puzzles that you'll solve, and then you'll come out and you'll be satisfied. Like, it's a satisfying, segmented map with lots of things to do, and you always have a star on the map to head towards. Even if you can't quite figure out how to get there, there's probably somewhere else that you could go, so there is a little bit of freedom there too. And the moment-to-moment gameplay is really fun. There are collectibles all over the place. You can hoover up these piles of leaves to find things underneath. You can pull fruit down from trees. And so there's always something to do. There's always something that you can see on the screen that you can interact with. It can be a bit of a collectathon, but the mechanic of using the Gust Buster, this is the hoover, the vacuum that the main character has. He wears like a Ghostbusters style backpack that has a vacuum attached to it. So you can hoover up collectibles, you can find nuts and bolts, you can find currency, you can find items that you can put into your backpack. And so it is a bit of a collectathon, but it's a very satisfying mechanic. And so it was always fun just to run around in this game, to be finding things, collecting things, and exploring. It was a really good time. And the other central mechanic of this game is spritelings. The little spriteling that you first saw, that little twiggy elf that led you into this realm, is just one of many, and they are pretty much like Pikmin. They're little nature sprites that can do different things. There are different types of spritelings that you will find throughout your journey. The first ones that you find are these little brown guys called twiglings, and they can destroy mushrooms to let you through into different areas of the map. You'll find some pink ones that can smash those crystals. You'll find red ones that can ignite thorny bushes to clear the way for you. So there's lots of different spritelings that you can find. You start off with just 5, but you can build that up over time. They can also carry things for you. So for example, if you find a big heavy piano, you can throw 10 little spritelings at it and they'll carry it across the map, and you can shepherd them across the map, removing any obstacles along the way. So there's a very Pikmin-y feel to this game. The main mechanic of the game is the spritelings, but it happens on this Zelda-style map with this Luigi's Mansion style sucking up of all of the little bits and pieces that you find. And it's a really effective mashing together of all of those cute, fun gameplay mechanics. The spritelings are really, really cute. You end up with a little army of them running around with you. They can die in combat, and they can die if you lead them into mud or water. So you have to manage your herd, which is fun most of the time. You can also collect little pips that allow you to hatch more spritelings to replace any that you've lost. You can throw them at enemies and they will attack. You can throw different types of spritelings at different types of enemies, and they will hack their health down faster. You can use them to weigh down puzzles, switches. You can use them to move giant boulders. The only downside of the spritelings, I think, is that they don't always return to you, and it's very easy to lose them in the landscape. But as I mentioned, they have added those recall stones in this field guide patch, so they have ameliorated the main problem of the spritelings by listening to players. And you start off with only 5 spritelings, and you need to increase the amount that you have until you have a whole little army of these cute little fairies running around behind you. It's really, really cute. It's really, really cool and fun. And as well as doing these puzzles, finding your spritelings, collecting currencies, going to the different stars on the map to find the green shields and to find missing objects and so forth, you can also power up your character. So as you're collecting stuff, you can craft things. For example, if you have a can and a seed and a piece of trash, you can use the crafting desk to mix them together and see what will happen. And there are loads and loads of different recipes that you can discover through experimentation that will give you potions that power up your characters temporarily, or tools that are useful like a flare. And there are all kinds of things that you can make. A kettle bomb that will allow you to blow up boulders and see what's behind. So there is a crafting element. You can also power up your health. You can increase health. You can power up your equipment so that the Gust Buster has less of a cooldown and will last for longer before it starts to cool down. There are currencies. There are the nuts and bolts that you can use to buy things, to improve the grove and to improve your equipment. And there is this glowing pollen that you can use to increase your spriteling cap and to hatch new spritelings. So there's quite a lot happening here. If you are someone that does like to improve your character and to get that feeling of improving over time and powering up and becoming more powerful, that's here for you too. How much you engage with it is really up to you, but it is there for people that do like that kind of thing. And as you're running around the map, there is a day-night cycle that's kind of key to the game. It has a few phases. There is a short sunrise, there is a long day, there is a short sunset, and then there is night. And night is dangerous. By day you can run around doing your thing, but at night it's when the Never comes out and nasty spirits will appear and hound you around the map. They're really bad news. It can be really a pain in the ass if you're halfway through a complex puzzle with several phases to it, using gates and locks and that kind of thing, and all your spritelings are spread out, and night falls and the Never just wrecks you and you lose all your spritelings. It can be a real pain in the ass. You can scare them off with flares, and there are some other mechanics that come along later in the game that make nighttime a bit easier, but for most of the game it's best to just return to camp. And the camp is a really fun little area. It has a ring of lights around it, so it's safe. There is a spriteling stump where you can hatch spritelings, withdraw them, put them back into the spirit well, select different kinds of spritelings that you might need for puzzles that are at hand. So you can have like a spriteling herd that is made up of all different kinds of spritelings based on what you need. So if you're going to the icy area, you might withdraw more ice spritelings, for example. There is also a stash where you can put collectibles because your bag doesn't have that many slots, although your bag is upgradable. There is a workbench that you can use for crafting. There is a campfire that you can save, and then there is a tent where you can end the day and wake up in the morning. So the camp becomes kind of a central hub and adds a lot to the rhythm of the game. There is a camp in each different biome, and you will find yourself going back to camp, rushing back to camp as night falls, just so that you don't get yourself into trouble. And some of the puzzles are quite long. Some of them took me quite a while to do. There are several multi-stage puzzles where you're using different kinds of spritelings. They're spread across many different levels, with many different gates that you're having to use different abilities to work your way through. And they have these multi-level solutions, multi-part solutions. And it can take a while. It can take a couple of tries to get through them. It can take a little bit of trial and error. You'll be using your spritelings in all kinds of different ways. You'll be using your vacuum. You'll be using a torch that you get. And you have to really think your way through them. They're pleasant. They're challenging. They're not too taxing. Like there was only a couple of times that I got stuck. But it's really fun, actually. The puzzles are really nice generally. Each area will have a bunch of puzzles that you have to do in order to open the way forward. And I generally had a good time with them and really enjoyed them. Same goes for the combat and the bosses. Bosses are really just new enemy types that you'll get used to. The combat is not that difficult if you manage your health carefully, if you have like a meal to top your health up. Even if you die though, it's not really a big problem. Another thing that they fixed in that patch, which is really done great work for this game, is that they made it less punishing to die. So if you do die in this game, you're taken back to the nearest camp. You lose a few spritelings, but not too many, and a little bit of your currency, but not too much. In the original, when I played it, I think you lost all of your spritelings when you died, which meant that you could lead to some really frustrating situations where you just slipped up in combat and lost your entire herd and would have to go through the grind of building up that herd again, collecting pips, hatching pips, getting all of the different spritelings back up to, if you can have 50 spritelings and you need 10 of each, it can take like an hour to get your herd back, and various rounds of the map, just collecting every single pip that you see. And so that patch has really balanced that out again. They've done a great job with that, and it's like a slightly different game, honestly. A lot of the frustrations that I had on my first playthrough are just gone now. So just to run through the highs and lows, I think that the highs have to begin with the art style. It's just absolutely beautiful, paper crafty, painted, hand-drawn, just absolutely charming. The music by Amos Roddy, who did the music for In Other Waters and Citizen Sleeper, is just wonderful throughout, very soothing, very lovely. The story is nice, it's very familiar in a good way, it's comfortable. You have to go and collect, the different crystals or whatever. You know what you're doing in this game. It feels Zelda-y, it feels classic, and it wears it well. It doesn't feel tired, it feels classic. And the love letter to Nintendo factor is a big thing for me. Combining Pikmin with Paper Mario, Luigi's Mansion, top-down Zelda, just wonderful. It's the indie game that I've played that I think comes closest to having that Nintendo level of cuteness and sheen and feel-good factor. And that's some pretty high praise. The cute storytelling is nice, the fairy tale atmosphere is nice, the characters seem perhaps little Moomins inspired or Where the Wild Things Are inspired, so classic children's fantasy literature is very, very present here. I like the sense of relative freedom, and I like the reasons to backtrack and unlock new areas. I enjoyed most of the puzzles, and the difficulty level as a whole felt pretty well judged. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was just a beautiful, relaxed game, and considering that I had struggled to find something to play during COVID, and that this one just really hit the spot for me, it was just gentle. It's a very gentle game. As for the downsides, I think that the day-night cycle is still a little short. It was lengthened in this patch, but it's still frustrating if you've really got your teeth into a puzzle, a multi-stage puzzle, or Nightfalls. You just have to abandon your work and come and do it all again. The day-night cycle was a little annoying in that respect. I was stumped on puzzles a couple of times, I would say through no fault of my own, actually. The 2 times that I had to go and look at a video online, it's because I had missed jumping points in the busy background. The downside of the visual splendor of this game is that it's a little cluttered at times, and so if you misread the height of where you are, for example, you don't quite clock the perspective correctly and realize that you can jump down into an inaccessible area, you'll just be walking in circles thinking, how the hell do I get there? And that happened to me a couple of times. It was just misreading the visual environment. It's a bit of a design issue, a small one. I would say that losing spritlings around the map was a really big pain, so it's amazing that they've come in and put those recall points there and just completely solved that issue. Your spritlings do still wander off a little bit, or, if you throw 10 spritlings at a gate to try and hack it down, and then you go through the gate and on your way, and then realize that only 8 of them came with you, they don't automatically return to you. They sometimes just stand there like little idiots, and so your spritlings can get lost, and you can end up with them all scattered around, and so there is no whistle like in Pikmin that has that circumference that makes all your spritlings come to you, although your Gustbuster vacuum cleaner does hoover them back to you, and yet still you can lose your spritlings quite regularly. But, the recall point does a good job at fixing that problem, so it's not such a big one. I would say that most of my original notes that I'm looking at right now, most of the problems were fixed by the patch. So, losing spritlings when you die has been taken away or ameliorated a little bit. Losing spritlings around the map has been ameliorated. All of the main beef that I had with this game was fixed in the patch. So really just shout out to Moonlight Kids, honestly. They've made a very fine game here, and the gripes are really just minor compared to the pleasure of playing this game. I finished every session feeling really happy with what I'd seen, feeling really relaxed and good. I slowed down and played this one, so if I started finding myself getting frustrated or lost in what I was supposed to be doing or stuck on a puzzle, I would just put my Switch down, go and do something else for a while, pick it up an hour later. And just the visuals and the music and, the whole charm of this game would be fresh again. My mind would be fresh again, and I would find my way through it. It's just a game with a great vibe. Nintendo fans, get on this. Play it on the Switch. It's the perfect place for it. That's The Wild at Heart. So that was The Wild at Heart. I hope you enjoyed that review. It was really nice to be back doing the podcast again. I miss doing it, I kind of wanted to do it, but I just wasn't feeling up to it. I couldn't draw breath. I had too much of a cough. I couldn't talk for that long without coughing. So it's really nice to be recovering from COVID and to be doing another episode for you all. Thanks for your patience. I'm sorry I didn't have an episode for you last week. But if you've played The Wild at Heart, if you'd like to tell me about your thoughts on it, you can do so. Find me on Twitter. I'm at Gaming in the Wild. Instagram. There's a Facebook page for the podcast too. You can find links for all of that at gaminginthewild.com. If you would like to support the podcast, I really appreciate it. Come join our Discord, come join our community. You can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild for $1 a month. I'll be back next week with another episode. I have started finally playing Ghost of Tsushima, a game that I've been wanting to play for a really long time. But I've been objecting to the fact that it was relaunched at £70 for the PS5 version instead of falling down to 20. So it's finally on PS Plus, and I was like, yeah, okay, it's time to try it. I've been having some fun with that one. It's got a few issues, but it's absolutely beautiful, and I do love a good open world game. So perhaps I'll talk about Ghost of Tsushima. Also, Stray is almost here. It's a game that I've been waiting for ever since we first saw it in that state of play last year. It's coming out on PlayStation Plus again. So wow, it's like, is PlayStation Plus actually going to be a Game Pass competitor? The two games I'm talking about are both PlayStation Plus games. So who knows, maybe I'll talk about Ghost of Tsushima, maybe I'll talk about Stray. Definitely nice to have PlayStation Plus Extra. I think because I had PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus, it meant that I was bumped straight onto the top tier, which means I get access to all of these great games, which I'm really happy about. I've been downloading a whole bunch of new stuff. I always love a good games service where there's just new stuff popping up for you all the time. So I'll definitely be playing Stray. It's out in just 3 days. So maybe this time next week I'll have enough thoughts on Stray. But anyway, thanks very much for listening. I appreciate you. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.